The views and opinions expressed by Howard and Ridley through Reclaim the Room, including the podcast, blog, and social media, are solely our own and do not reflect the views or policies of any employer or organization. Content is provided for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute legal, medical, or psychological advice. Copyright Reclaim the Room, all rights reserved.
Hello, and welcome back to Reclaim the Room. I'm Ridley, and I'm really glad that you're here with me today. And before we get into the heart of the episode, you may have noticed that Howard is still unable to join me for this one. Right now, it's just happened to work out that I'm the one in front of the mic. However, she will be back in future episodes, and we're both ready for that to happen at some point. But today, it's just you and me having a real conversation about something that your body has probably been trying to bring up for a long time. And since you're here, I want to ask you for a very small favor. It actually makes a huge difference for Howard and I if you do this. If you're watching on YouTube, take a moment to like this episode and subscribe to the channel. Tap the notification bell so that you'll know when the new episode drops. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leaving a rating and a short review is one of the easiest ways to help other educators find this space. We're trying to reach teachers who feel like they're hanging on by a thread and don't have the words yet for what they're feeling. And your click, your rating, and your review really will help us do that. All right, so let's settle in together for a minute. If you can, unclench your jaw just a little, let your shoulders drop a notch. Take one slow, gentle breath. You don't have to fix anything, change anything, or make anything perfect for right now. All you have to do is listen and notice what lands. You are not on duty at this very moment, and this one is for you. Because today we're talking about your nervous system, not in a textbook kind of way, not in a medical kind of way, and definitely not in a let me overwhelm you with jargon kind of way. We're talking about the version of your nervous system that shows up when the classroom phone rings with that tone. You know, when a kid walks in with that look on their face, when the hallway shifts from calm to chaotic in about 3 seconds. We're going to talk about why your heart races, why your stomach drops, and why you go home and feel like you've gotten hit by a truck, even though nothing big happened today. There are researchers who have put language to what educators live every day. People like Sonia Lotar, who have shown that teachers carry stress loads very similar to first responders. And I think for most of us, that sounds like news and more like someone finally writing down what our bodies have been saying for years. So, that is where we are going today. A kind, honest nervous system 101 for educators. Not to give you more to do, but to help you understand what is already happening inside you so that you can stop blaming yourself for reacting like a human in what seems like an inhuman environment. This is a conversation that matters, and it starts right now. Let's reclaim the room. I want you to think about a very ordinary school moment. Maybe you're standing at your door during the passing period. For a stretch of seconds, everything is just noisy in the normal kind of way. Footsteps, chatter, lockers, someone laughing too loudly. Somewhere down the hall, a sound changes. It's not even a full shout yet. It's just sharper. The air shifts. You don't see what's happening, but you feel your body leaning forward. Your attention narrows. You're suddenly more awake, more alert, and a little less in your own skin. You take in a breath and you hold it without even realizing that you're doing it. That entire chain reaction happens before you consciously register a single thought. That is your nervous system. It is your built-in surveillance system, your internal hall monitor, your first responder. Neuroscience folk will talk about the sympathetic nervous system and threat perception and arousal states. From a teacher's point of view, it simply means this: your body is constantly scanning for, are we okay? And for educators, that question is rarely answered with a simple yes or no. It's usually something closer to, we're okay for now, but that can change in about 2 seconds. Researchers who look at workplace stress, like Sonnentag and Fritz, they describe this as anticipatory stress. Your body staying ready because your job has taught it that anything can happen at any. Nobody pulls you aside when you get to your first teaching job and says, by the way, your nervous system is going to be doing overtime in this building. We talk about classroom management, lesson plans, content standards, behavior strategies, but we don't talk about the part that, for you, tightens up every time you hear your name over the intercom. We don't talk about the way that your chest reacts when you see a particular student's name pop up in your email subject line. We don't talk about how your body starts Sunday night bracing before you've even opened your laptop. But that's the reality of teaching. Every day, your nervous system comes to work with you, and it doesn't clock out just because the bell rings. Underneath all of that are the different states that your nervous system moves through. People like Stephen Porges have done a lot of work explaining what those states look like in the body, but I want to translate that into educator language. When you feel most like yourself, when you can crack a joke, redirect a student without snapping, remember what you were about to say, notice a kid's new haircut, that's your regulated state. Your system has enough energy, or rather enough emotion. Your system has enough information to believe, in this moment, I am safe enough to think, to connect, and to be present. Your voice is steadier, your thoughts are clearer, and you can access all of your teacher tools. Then there's the state most educators know a little too well, the fight or flight state. Maybe a situation escalates quickly in your room. Maybe you hear a crash down the hall. Maybe a student comes in already dysregulated. Your heart rate jumps and your breathing gets shallow. Your attention narrows down to whatever feels risky or out of control. Kenneth Herman and other researchers who study teacher stress have found that unpredictable classroom environments push educators into this activated state over and over again. And you may look calm from the outside. You're giving directions, you're moving students around, you're making decisions, but inside, your system is screaming, handle this right now. There is no room for error. And there's the shutdown state, sometimes called freeze, sometimes fawn, sometimes collapse. This is the state where you are still functioning, still technically doing your job, but it feels like the light has dimmed behind your eyes. You catch yourself staring at your computer screen, but you're not really reading anything on it. You nod along in a meeting without taking in a word. You say yes to something you do not have the capacity for because the idea of pushing back feels overwhelming. Daniel Siegel talks about this as the brain conserving energy when it has been firing on high alert for too long. In teacher terms, this is, I'm here, but my tank is beyond empty and I'm running on fumes. You cycle through versions of these states all day, every day. Sometimes the shifts are tiny. Sometimes they're dramatic. Most of the time, you barely catch them because your job demands that you keep moving. The problem is not that your nervous system is doing this. The problem is that nobody told you what it was, so you've been calling it other things like being too sensitive, being tired, being unprofessional. being impatient. I'm just burnt out. Maybe I'm not cut out to teach. When we don't understand our bodies, we fill in the gaps with blame. Now, layer on the environment of a typical school. Think about the sheer number of sensory and emotional inputs hitting you on a normal day. Bells, intercoms, doors slamming, kids joking, kids arguing, fluorescent lights, the cafeteria, a student who has been withdrawn all week, another one who won't stop talking, a parent email that arrives with 3 paragraphs of frustration before you've even had your breakfast. Researchers like Hayden and her colleagues have looked at educator exposure to students' trauma and found that it isn't just the big events. A fight, a lockdown, a crisis, all those can take a toll. It is also the ongoing drip of heavy stories, emotional needs, and unpredictable behavior that keeps your nervous system in a state of constant readiness. Picture a teacher who starts the day feeling relatively okay. They walk in with coffee, they set down their bag, they take a breath, and before first period even ends, they have responded to a student who came in crying, another who refused to do any work, an email about paperwork they forgot to submit, and a surprise announcement about a schedule change. None of these moments are catastrophic by themselves, but each one nudges the system further away from "I'm okay" and a little closer to "I'm braced." By lunchtime, the teacher's shoulders have been shrugged up against their ears for so long that they don't even remember what it feels like to be relaxed. On top of that, many educators bring their own histories into the room. Basil Vonderkolk likes to say that the body keeps the score. If you have lived through your own experiences of instability, unpredictability, or harm, your nervous system has already learned what danger feels like. When a student yells in your classroom, your system may not just be responding to that moment. It may be remembering every moment in your life where raised voices meant that you were not safe. When a hallway gets too loud, your system may remember every time chaos led to something bad. Now, none of this makes you irrational or weak. It means that your body is incredibly efficient at recognizing patterns it believes are connected to danger. So let me bring this down into a micro moment that happens in different versions all over the country. Imagine a teacher on a high discipline campus. They're in the middle of helping a student with an assignment when they hear the first sharp sound of an argument rising in the hallway. Their student is still asking a question. Their email box is still open on the screen. The clock is still ticking down the period. But for a second, everything inside the teacher reorients them towards the hallway. Their heart jumps. Their attention leaves the kid in front of them and flies through the doorway to whatever brought about the noise. A part of their mind is running through questions. Is anyone going to step in? Do I need to move my own class? Are my students safe right now? They may never leave the classroom. They may never see what happened. Admin may handle it before they even reach the door. But just like that, their nervous system has burned extra fuel. And it doesn't get that fuel back simply because the situation turned out fine. What research on secondary traumatic stress in educators keeps highlighting is that teachers are constantly absorbing emotional intensity that does not get fully processed or released. Charles Figley uses the phrase emotional residue to describe what builds up when helpers carry the stories and cries of people that they support. When a student shares something heavy about home and then the bell rings, you don't magically clear that out of your system when you say, okay, well, have a good day. You tuck it in the corner of your mind and you keep teaching, and your nervous system keeps watching, and at some point you find yourself on your couch at 9 o'clock at night, staring at nothing, wondering why you feel like you've been working underground in a mine instead of in a classroom. So what do we do with all this? This is where I want to be very careful. Teachers have been handed a lot of self-care advice that honestly can feel insulting. You are not going to fix chronic nervous system overload with a scented candle and a 5-minute mindfulness challenge printed on a poster in the staff lounge. You are not going to fix it by pretending you can somehow rise above your biology through sheer force of will and a color-coded planner. What people like Stephen Porges and Daniel Siegel keep pointing back to is that regulation is built out of small repeated cues of safety, not gigantic, dramatic interventions. If you cannot change the fact that the bell is going to ring and the hallway is going to be loud, what you can change is the way that you speak to your own body in those moments. When you feel your chest tighten because the phone is ringing again, you probably cannot let it go to voicemail. But you might be able to put your feet flat on the floor, exhale a little more slowly than you inhaled, and mentally note, my system just jumped. That makes sense. I'm still here. I'm still breathing. That kind of short, grounded acknowledgement does not fix the environment, but it does tell your nervous system that someone is at the wheel. Daniel Siegel talks about how simply naming an internal state can begin to bring the thinking part of the brain back online. Another piece is co-regulation. We like to imagine ourselves as fully independent and self-contained professionals, but the truth is that our nervous systems are relational. They respond to other bodies. You already know this, even if you have never said it this way. There are colleagues you seek out because just being around them makes you breathe easier. There may be one administrator whose tone of voice instantly calms staff down during a crisis, and another whose footsteps in the hallway make everyone stiffen. When you stand next to someone who is genuinely regulated, your body gets to borrow a little bit of their steadiness, and the same thing is true in reverse. When you are regulated, you become that person for someone else without even realizing it. Think about those small conversations you have in the copy room or at the teacher mailboxes. Sometimes someone might say, "How's your day going?" And you give the automatic, good, because you really don't have the time or the energy to unpack everything. But every now and then, someone says it in a different way. They pause for just an extra second and they actually look at you and they say, "No, really, how are you holding up today?" That's when your shoulders drop a little. You laugh. Maybe you roll your eyes. You let out a breath. Nothing in your schedule has changed, but something in your system did. That is co-regulation. People like Porges talk about this in terms of social nervous system, but in teacher language, it is simply that one person who makes everything feel a tiny bit more survivable. Now, we cannot talk honestly about educator nervous systems without mentioning leadership and systems, because no matter how many deep breaths you take, if your campus culture runs on chaos, secrecy, and last-minute changes, your nervous system will stay fired up. Research on teacher burnout and well-being keeps returning to the same conclusion. The single strongest predictor of whether teachers stay and whether they stay healthy is not how difficult their students are. It is how supported they feel by admin. When teachers describe feeling trusted, backed up, and heard, their stress levels look so different than when they describe feeling blamed, surveilled, or ignored. Now imagine two different staff meetings. In one, a leader walks in with a clipped tone, starts with a list of what teachers are not doing well, and then adds 3 new requirements with no acknowledgments of existing workload. By the time that meeting ends, you can feel the entire room buzzing with quiet resentment and exhaustion. In the other meeting, the leader starts by naming something hard that everyone has been living through, acknowledges the strain it has put on staff, shares information clearly, And even when delivering bad news, speaks with transparency instead of threat. The tasks and the expectations might actually be similar. The nervous system impact on the adults in the room, however, is not. When a school talks about regulation, they almost always point to students first. And of course, students' nervous systems matter deeply. They are living through things outside of school that we cannot always see, and what shows up in the classroom is often just the tip of a much larger iceberg. But if the adults in the building are dysregulated, if they are running on chronic fight or flight or stuck in shutdown, then the whole system is asking them to do something impossible, to lend calm that they do not have. A campus cannot be more regulated than the adults who run it. Now, that is not a judgment on teachers. It is an indictment on the system that pretends they can bypass human biology. So where does that leave you? Listening to this, probably tired, probably with a to-do list waiting for you as soon as this episode ends. And I'm not going to offer you a 10-step program or a miracle fix. What I am going to offer is permission and a few small, very real next steps. First, you have permission to stop telling yourself that your reactions mean you are failing. If your heart races during a lockdown drill, that does not mean you are too sensitive. It means that your body believes that this could be real, because in our world, sometimes it is. If you feel dread on Sunday nights, that does not mean you are weak. It means your nervous system has collected enough data to know that walking back into that building takes effort. Second, you can start to treat your nervous system like a partner instead of an enemy. When you notice yourself snapping at students, instead of going straight to shame, you might pause later and say, okay, what was my body going through in that moment? Where was I already stretched thin? That doesn't erase responsibility, but it does add understanding. Teachers are very good at offering grace to everyone else. Turning even a fraction of that towards your own body is a radical act in the teaching world. Third, you can experiment with tiny, honest regulation tools that fit inside the day you actually have. Not the day on the poster, the real one. Maybe that means giving yourself a 3-breath rule before you answer an email that spiked your blood pressure. Maybe it means having a short phrase that you repeat in your mind when you feel that your system is starting to rev up. Something like, I can take one step at a time, or I know I'm not alone in this. Maybe it means closing your eyes for 10 seconds in your empty classroom and letting your jaw soften before the next group of students come in. These are not magical things. They're just small acts of refusal against a system that wants you to ignore your body until it breaks. Now, as we wrap this up, I want to return to that image of you standing in the hallway or at your desk or in the middle of your classroom while a dozen different things pull at your attention. Your nervous system is not going to stop responding to those things because its job is to keep you alive, not help you appear completely, perfectly composed. But you can begin to understand what those responses mean. And you can start to say, of course, I felt that jump. My body read that was a possible threat. Instead of, why am I feeling like this? You can notice when you are inching closer to shutdown and ask yourself what support you need instead of waiting until your only option is to cry in your car in the parking lot again. You deserve more than survival. You deserve a workplace that recognizes that what you do is not just intellectual labor, but nervous system labor. You deserve policies and practices that take into account the fact that you are human. And even if your nervous system is slow to catch up to that truth, you can start living like it is valid today. Now, if this conversation has felt like someone finally naming something you've been feeling in your bones for quite a while, I want to ask again for a small bit of support that has a big ripple effect. If you're watching on YouTube, Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so that you'll know when new episodes drop. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, take a moment and just leave a rating and a short review that helps others find this space. When you share the episode or tell a colleague about it, you're not just promoting a show. You're opening the door for someone else's nervous system to feel a little bit more understood and a little less alone. And I really want to thank you for spending this time with me and for letting your own body be part of the conversation instead of something that you have to fight against. Thank you for the work that you do, teachers, both what is seen and unseen, on campuses that do not always deserve how much of yourself you bring. Take care of your nervous system where you can, in the small, real ways that fit into your day. You are not broken for reacting to a hard job like a human being. You are proof that the system runs on the backs and the bodies of the people who care. Take a breath, unclench your jaw again, especially if it just kind of naturally gets back to the clenching, like mine sometimes does. And as always, thank you for joining me today, and thank you for helping Howard and I reclaim the room. We'll see you next time.
Reclaim the Room credits, otherwise known as Teacher Duties as Assigned. Bus Duty, Howard. Hallway Duty, Ridley. Cafeteria Duty, Howard. Recess Duty, Ridley. Field Trip Coordinator, Howard. After School Tutoring, Ridley. Required attendance for Howard and Ridley, staff meetings, PLC, and every single one of those committees.